China's military is being wiped out from within as the country's leader, Xi Jinping, carries out sweeping purges of high-ranking officials. No one appears to be safe, as even the most respected generals with decades of experience are being shown the door. Xi believes this approach will help build a more loyal, modern, and effective army. He's wrong. Numerous experts instead argue that his antics are shattering the military's foundational strength and cohesion, setting the People's Liberation Army (PLA) back several decades and plunging the Chinese armed forces into a crisis from which they may never recover. So, to understand this story, the first question to answer is why? Why, right when China is expanding its military, building the largest navy on Earth, and projecting more power than ever before, would Xi Jinping risk destabilizing his own military? The answer, quite simply, comes down to control. In 2017, during the 19th Party Congress, Xi laid out plans for the construction of a truly world-class military force. By 2020, he wanted the PLA's ground forces to become fully mechanized, with world-leading armored vehicles and advanced information technologies opening up new strategic capabilities. By 2035, he anticipates the full modernization of the military to be complete. And by 2049, which is also the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, world-class status will have been achieved. Through modernization and investment in state-of-the-art systems, Xi hopes to see the Chinese military live up to its potential and become one of the most fearsome fighting forces ever assembled. It may never be able to match the United States military, but Xi wants to at least narrow the gap between the two nations. This will, in theory, grant China more power and freedom to pursue its long-term strategic goals, like the much-talked-about reunification with Taiwan, with less risk of the country's enemies interfering. But Xi doesn't just want a more powerful, high-tech military. He also wants one that raises the benchmarks for discipline, professionalism, and loyalty. He wants an army that never says no, in which every member of personnel, from the lowliest recruits to the highest-ranking officers, is fully committed to the cause and entirely willing to obey whatever orders they receive from the ruling party, without question or hesitation. An army that he, and he alone, controls. There's no room in an army like that for free thinkers, for people who might upset the order or go against the grain. And so, those kinds of people are being systematically removed as we speak. Are we already in World War III? Because depending on what you read, it can feel like we're living in completely different realities. And keeping up with the news isn't the hard part anymore, it's figuring out what's actually true. Take this story covered by nearly 200 sources across the spectrum. It reports the US military says its blockade of Iranian ports has completely halted economic trade within 36 hours. But just one day earlier, another story, mostly covered by nearly 80 sources, most being left-leaning, said marine traffic in the Strait of Hormuz was barely affected on the first day of the blockade. So, which is it? Total shutdown, barely a disruption, or can both be true? That dividing coverage is exactly why we use ground news to help keep us informed on the multiple active conflicts happening around the world. If you only saw one of those headlines, you'd walk away with just one perspective and a completely different understanding of what's going on. Ground news pulls in thousands of news stories every day and organizes them by topic, showing you bias, reliability, and ownership for every source so you can see every angle in one place. One feature we've been using a lot lately is Blind Spot. It shows you stories heavily covered by one side of the political spectrum, but barely talked about by the other. No matter where you fall politically, breaking out of the echo chamber gives you a more accurate understanding of what's really happening, and that's incredibly important when it comes to breaking through the fog of war. So, go to ground.news/military show or scan the QR code for 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan. And it brings the price down for less than the price of a cup of coffee. So give Ground News a shot for yourself. Beginning in 2022 and continuing all the way through into 2026, Xi Jinping has orchestrated an unprecedented purge of China's military leadership, with more than 100 senior officers and dozens of generals and lieutenant generals removed from their posts, with dozens more currently classed as either missing or under investigation. these aren't just random officers or relatively low-level individuals. They're some of China's most experienced military leaders. In late 2024, for example, the country's former defense minister, Wei Fenghe, was investigated on charges of corruption and eventually expelled from the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, with his rank of general in the rocket force being revoked. Wei's successor, Li Shangfu, also mysteriously vanished from public life in 2023 before being removed from office and expelled from the party, setting a record as the shortest-serving Minister of National Defense in history. Liu Chao, commander of the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, was another big name to fall, being officially expelled from the party in July 2024. And in 2025, the purge picked up pace, with numerous generals, including He Weidong and Miao Huao, being accused of what the CCP called extremely serious crimes. 2026 hasn't shown any signs of this trend subsiding. In fact, in January, China announced the removal of two of the top generals on its Central Military Commission, Liu Zhenli and Zhang Youxia. Liu dedicated his entire life to the military, enlisting in the PLA in 1983 and graduating from the PLA National Defense University a year later. He went on to play an integral role in the Sino-Vietnamese conflicts, which lasted throughout the 1980s through to 1991, famously helping defend the line against no less than 36 separate Vietnamese assaults. As the years went by, he rose up the ranks, becoming Chief of Staff of the 65th Group Army in 2009, Chief of Staff of the People's Armed Police in 2015, Chief of Staff of the PLA Ground Force later that same year, and Chief of Staff of the Joint Staff Department of the CMC in 2023. Zhang enjoyed a similarly successful career. The son of General Zhang Zhongshun, another highly successful and decorated PLA figurehead, Zhang joined the military in 1968 and fought in the Sino-Vietnamese War. There, when he was only in his mid-20s and serving as a company commander, Zhang demonstrated a remarkable level of tactical aptitude far beyond his years. His unit was pinned down while attempting to assault a fortified hilltop position. Understanding that any additional attempts at a frontal assault were sure to fail, Zhang made a bold request. He asked for an entire battalion, 4 times larger than his own unit, to carry out a jungle flanking maneuver. The regimental commander ultimately approved the request, and the surprise attack worked. The Vietnamese defenses were breached, and the Chinese soldiers celebrated a valuable victory. Only 5 years later, Zhang was in charge of the main assault in the Battle of Laoshan, the biggest engagement of the entire Sino-Vietnamese border war. Again, his tactics were both bold and ambitious. His strategy, which involved the military's first complete infantry-artillery coordination plan since the Cultural Revolution, involved massive amounts of artillery support, way beyond what any regimental commander would usually ask for or be entitled to. But once more, it worked out. Despite facing a massive Vietnamese counterattack, Zhang's men held their position against 6 enemy regiments, thanks in no small part to the artillery backing them up. He'd proven his abilities and earned the many promotions that followed, with Zhang becoming a major general in 1997, lieutenant general in 2007, and general in 2011. In 2017, he was awarded the prestigious position of vice chairman of the CMC, but in late 2025 he disappeared from public view. Then in January, he and Liu were officially removed from their posts. All of a sudden, all of their years of experience counted for nothing. All of their service, sacrifice and prestige were wiped out overnight. Xi and his most loyal supporters will argue that this was all for a noble cause. The official party line is that these mass removals of major military officers aren't part of a political purge, they're simply the result of Beijing clamping down on corruption. The CCP claims that the PLA had been suffering from a serious and long-running corruption problem, involving officers embezzling funds, buying their way to higher ranks, falsifying documents, and so on. There's certainly some evidence to support this argument, and as Xi supporters note, a corrupt military cannot possibly reach that all-important world-class status that China is aiming at. The military would never be able to attain the high standards of credibility and quality it strives for if it's filled with officers who lie, steal, and cheat on a regular basis. As a result, the party says it was left with no other option but to investigate and punish those who had broken the rules. The CCP also argues that the party must always remain in full control of the military. There cannot be any risk of coups or fragmented command chains, which is another supposed justification for the ongoing removal of high-ranking officers and their replacement with figures who may not have as much experience but are seen as more loyal and trustworthy. Many analysts, however, argue that the party's stance doesn't stand up to forensic inspection. The Jamestown Foundation, for example, published a lengthy analysis entitled "Jiang Yoush's Differences with Xi Jinping Led to His Purge," using open-source data from various official Chinese sources to argue that the charges against Jiang, as well as possibly other figures implicated in the purge, are less to do with corruption and more to do with disagreements with Xi Jinping's policies. Namely, the report noted that both Jiang and Liu had resisted directives that they felt were unrealistic, particularly regarding a possible invasion of Taiwan by 2027, with Jiang arguing that 2035 was a much more realistic target. It seems, therefore, that Xi isn't necessarily punishing corruption, but disobedience, rooting out anyone who would dare stand up and tell him no. As Helena Legarda, a researcher at Merix, puts it, official narratives after the purge of Jiang and Liu make it clear that the dismissals were political in nature and based on a perceived or real lack of loyalty to Xi and his goals. But in eliminating those who might challenge him, many analysts argue that Xi is making the PLA significantly weaker and undermining his own world-class military aspirations. But before we look closer at that, this is why we make the Military Show, to explain how power really moves. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. On the surface, it looks as though Xi is both culling corrupt officers and getting rid of people who could undermine his authority in the future in the process. Look deeper, and his real objective begins to emerge. He's not just targeting individuals, he's targeting connections, the informal but important networks of power that link different people and groups within the military, known in Chinese as guanxi. These kinds of networks exist in some shape or form in every military, all over the globe. They're a natural and almost inescapable consequence of how the military world works. Soldiers who enlist at the same time and undergo basic training at the same facility will always share a certain kind of kinship, for example. Senior officers will often mentor the most promising troops under their command and keep in touch with them even if they move around to other units or locations later in their careers. People who serve together will naturally develop bonds and will often be willing to help or look out for one another in the future should the opportunity arise. So, even though militaries on paper appear to run purely according to rank, orders, and formal chains of command, there's also an underlying layer of relationships that influences how things work. That's especially true for a military as vast and complex as China's, where guanxi are not formally recognized or regulated, but quietly shape the way the overall system functions. When a Chinese soldier has a problem, for example, he might not necessarily want to follow the official channels dealing with delays and bureaucracy. He might instead reach out to his old commanding officer for advice or contact a former squad mate. From the personnel's perspective, there are numerous benefits to this system. It's often faster and simpler, for example, for members of the military who know and trust one another to assist each other, without having to go through the system and wade through layers of red tape and approval processes. Guanxi enables trust, fosters communication, and compensates for the overly strict and rigid top-down structures that exist through the PLA. Indeed, writing for War on the Rocks, Jamestown Foundation fellow and Chinese military expert Christopher Nye notes, "In China, relying on informal networks is how an officer actually navigates the system. It's the mechanism through which one secures a promotion, obtains political shelter during an investigation, and even negotiates for battlefield command or prioritize ammunition. These guanxi coalesce into an umbrella, the essential patronage infrastructure that provides the security and resources necessary to function within a totalizing party state. It's thanks to guanxi, for example, that Jiang Youshi was able to get approval when he requested a full battalion of reinforcements and all the artillery support he wanted during the Sino-Vietnamese War. He was the son of a famous and well-respected general. He had a network of connections, and he called in some favors from people who knew his father's name. Later in his career, Jiang continued to leverage his connections to achieve his aims. While serving as commander of the Shenyang military region in the late 2000s, for example, he spearheaded a military housing program that involved using military land allocations to arrange huge construction deals between local governments and commercial developers. This was hugely beneficial for military personnel, as it secured much-needed housing for literally thousands of officers, and Jiang did it in a way that helped to bypass some of the formal constraints that would have usually made such a feat almost impossible. There have been countless other similar stories throughout Chinese military history, in which personal networks have helped personnel overcome bureaucratic hurdles or achieve things that simply wouldn't have been possible had they operated according to the rigid rules of the system. High-ranking commanders, for example, have been able to recognize the most talented and ambitious recruits within their own guanxi networks and elevate them to higher roles. Officers have also leveraged their connections to assist with everything from weapons procurement to interdepartmental coordination. Cynics could argue that these kinds of connections cause bias or imbalance in the military machine. Those who know better, meanwhile, will argue that these networks are natural and healthy byproducts of that machine. They're the inevitable result of dedicating oneself to the military. Soldiers at all levels will always form connections with the people around them, and an officer who does their duty, mentors subordinates, rewards those who apply themselves, and cultivates trust across different departments hasn't broken any kind of code. They've done their best with the role they were given. Unfortunately, that's not how Xi sees it. As Nye notes, China's leader has a tendency to view informal networks with perpetual suspicion. For him, there's always some level of risk attached to guanxi, because if enough high-ranking officers form their own connections and cliques, they could consolidate their power to defy party orders or shape the military as they see fit, not as he sees fit. Xi Jinping's ideal army is one in which the high command is atomized, with officers and officials who are competent, replaceable, and fiercely loyal to nobody but the supreme leader. He doesn't want them making connections with one another or bending the rules now and then to save time or help each other out. He wants a system that is strictly regulated and perfectly predictable, where every member of personnel, no matter their experience or seniority, does exactly as they're told every single time. And so, he's cutting the people who don't fit that vision and shattering those informal networks at the same time. He clearly thinks it's the right move, the only way to achieve his aims. In reality, it's likely doing much more harm than good, because when you get rid of so many senior officers all in such a short span of time, you're not just eliminating individuals, but destroying the very system that they were holding together. These aren't low-level soldiers. They're people with decades of command experience and proven records of competence and success at the highest levels. That sort of experience and the skills that come with it don't just appear overnight. There aren't ready-grown replacements for chiefs of staff just waiting in the wings, ready and able to step seamlessly into high-ranking positions in one of the biggest military forces the world has ever seen, to oversee complex operations, coordinate strategy across different branches, and make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Xi is actively investigating, arresting, and expelling the precious few people who could fulfill these kinds of roles to the world-class standard he strives for. And he's replacing them with people who may be more loyal and far less likely to go behind his back, but also have nowhere near that same level of trust, authority, and respect. New commanders are being thrust into positions they don't know, inheriting organizations they didn't build, and teams that don't fully trust them, and asked to operate according to the strictest, tightest of rule sets, where even a single false move can be career-ending. So, what happens next? These new commanders become excessively wary. They operate with the utmost caution, constantly frightened of making the wrong move, saying the wrong thing, or even being seen with the wrong person. They double-check everything, avoid even the tiniest of risks, and follow every procedure to the letter. Bit by bit, this will inevitably affect the wider culture of the Chinese military. Eventually, it's likely to reach a point where personnel at all levels are less focused on performance or excellence and instead on their own survival. And when that happens, the very power that China wants to project will inevitably begin to crumble. Because modern warfare demands speed, initiative, and bold decision-making abilities. But China is building an army that lacks all three of those key factors. An army that's slow, hesitant, and gripped by fear. The further down this path Xi goes, the worse it could get. As his military becomes more disciplined and loyal, it's also likely to become less honest. Real feedback will disappear, genuine voices of dissent will be silenced, and there will no longer be people willing to speak up and say when something isn't a good idea or a plan might have flaws. Instead, Xi will have an army of sycophants praising his every move, terrified to show even the slightest semblance of disagreement. That's an incredibly dangerous dynamic, because if there's nobody there to speak the truth, China may make major military decisions based on lies. As he becomes more confident in his country's capacities, for example, Xi could launch an attack on Taiwan even sooner than expected, which could quite easily become the flashpoint for a far larger conflict, dragging in other nations from all over the world, including the United States and Europe, and potentially triggering a global conflict, the likes of which the world has sought to prevent for so many decades. And it's all because of one man's hubris and inability to cope with the very idea of anyone else encroaching on his dominance. Xi Jinping wants to build the perfect military, a force that's modern, disciplined, and loyal to a fault. He's doing everything in his power to achieve it, removing those he sees as rivals, tightening authority, and reshaping the system from the top down. But in removing the so-called corruption, he's also eradicating flexibility. In destroying informal networks, he's wiping out trust, and in demanding loyalty, he's discouraging honesty. And the effects of this may not be all that noticeable during peacetime. But when conflict comes, which it almost certainly will, the damage he's done will be impossible to hide. Now, for a deeper look at how the PLA is nowhere near as powerful as Xi wishes it was, watch this video, which explores how Japan has exposed critical weaknesses in China's military posture. Alternatively, check out this video to see how China's seemingly world-beating innovations rarely live up to the hype, as one of Beijing's best air defenses failed to function in Iran. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more insights, analysis, and reporting on major military matters around the world.